19-year-old Samuel J. Evans, one of two apprentices who had been on the Jason, sat down with the newspapers to tell his story on December 6th, the day after the Jason had met with disaster. The New York Times, December 7th, 1893, reported, quote, "We sailed," said he, "from Calcutta last February with a cargo of jute butts for Boston. 2 days after leaving port, we were nearly dismasted in a storm and had to put into Mauritius for repairs. During the gale, our mate was washed overboard and lost. After leaving Mauritius, we had fair weather up to the equator. Since November 15th, we have encountered easterly gales with frequent snowsqualls."
Hello, and welcome to the Shipwreck Archive.
Thank you. Would you happen to have the story? The Jason is spotted in the storm.
Here we are. Enjoy!
The Jason was not the only ship to find that the winter weather of late 1893 was challenging. The New England magazine of November 1904 contained a feature on New England shipwrecks. It was mentioned that during the fall of 1893, one hurricane followed another on the Atlantic. They started among the southern islands and then swept up the shore from Florida to Newfoundland, leaving a trail of destruction in their wake. They estimated that the storms had cost between 3,000 and 4,000 lives. The American marine engineer described the same year's storms as something that every mariner would remember, that the hurricanes had left a wide swath of death and destruction from Newfoundland to Florida. In the north, ships were torn from their moorings and sent adrift to founder, and in the south, tidal waves inundated the ports, made havoc at Charleston and Savannah, and destroyed shipping all along the Atlantic seaboard there. It became bad enough that in October, the dynamite vessel, the Vesuvius, was dispatched to destroy the wrecked vessels along the east coast because they had become a hazard to shipping. The most severe storm to hit Massachusetts struck on the night of the 5th of December. Sleet, rain, and snow, accompanied by a powerful wind, lashed Cape Cod throughout the night. Telegraph services were disrupted by broken lines. It was the sort of weather that made everyone concerned about the possibility of shipping disasters, especially the men who were members of the Cape Cod Life-Saving Service. The patrolmen of the Life-Saving Service struggled to even go on their patrol in the conditions, but they did, their eyes doing their best to strain through the storm to see any ships that might be in distress. With wind coming from the direction of the sea, blowing snow directly into their faces, they could take glances towards the sea for ships at intervals. Since there was a much higher chance of a shipwreck in such stormy conditions, patrols were doubled. Every member of the crew was on duty, dressed, with boats and life-saving apparatus ready to go at a moment's notice. The first station to spot the 1,512-ton Clyde-built iron-hulled schooner, the Jason, was Nauset Three Lights Station. The Jason had been built in 1870 and was owned by the firm of A&J H. Harmichael and Company of Greenock, Scotland. She was on a voyage from Calcutta to Boston with a cargo of bales of jute butts, with a crew of 24, under the command of Captain Macmillan. The powerful storm that the Jason was now sailing in was not the first that she had met with, but the crew of the Nauset station could see that the ship was in a dangerous position, and they telephoned down the line to the other life-saving stations that there was a ship in distress that was likely to wreck somewhere along their coast. The Jason had departed from Calcutta in February, But only a few days into her voyage, she had encountered a powerful cyclone that had claimed the life of their first officer when he was swept from the ship's deck. The storm had also cost them both of their masts. The Jason had limped into Mauritius for repairs, which had taken 6 months. When she had finally been ready to start her journey again, she had met with far better weather, and her journey from Mauritius to the coast of Cape Cod had taken her 80 days. Captain Macmillan was not completely certain of his position. There had been snow, and he had not been able to take any observations for about 2 days. He spoke with a New York pilot boat, which gave him some idea, but when about 100 miles from the Cape, he decided to bring his ship more westward in the hopes of spotting a landmark, though it was still his intention to keep a good distance from the Cape. This decision would prove to be a fatal mistake. On the morning of the 5th, they began to encounter heavier snow, and the wind began to blow strongly. Soon, the crew of the Jason could no longer see more than 3 ship lengths. They were running under their 3 lower topsails alone as they were buffeted by the storm. The conditions cleared up for a little while, around 3:30 in the afternoon, long enough for them to realize that they were almost in among the breakers on the shore. They weren't able to tack the ship, and there was little maneuvering room, so they got to work close hauling the ship with as many sails as they felt her spars could stand in the conditions, in the hopes that they would be able to get past the Cape, even though they were so dangerously close to shore. It was in this position that the Nauset life-saving station had spotted them just before 5 in the evening, and considered them to be in a dangerous enough spot to alert the other stations. When the Jason was seen, the crew was still in the rigging, managing the sails, which were growing ragged due to the force of the storm. The ship was hugging the shore far too closely for comfort. With the confirmation of their fears that a ship would find herself in danger during a storm, the life-saving stations took the additional precaution of hitching horses to the beach carts. By 7, with nothing having been seen or heard of the ship, life-saving stations were almost beginning to hope that she had managed to round the Cape after all, against all of their expectations. Instead, the Jason had found herself close to the Pamet River Station. The Pamet River Station was one of the original 9 stations that were created on Cape Cod in 1872. The Pamet River Station had been built a few hundred yards from the high water mark, but over the years, the water had made enough inroads into the beach that by 1902 there was talk about moving it back before it got swallowed. This spoke to the challenges that the crew encountered on patrol as well. During high water, the patrolmen were forced to climb along the tops of sand dunes and along cliffs that were 100 feet above sea level, frequently in poor conditions. In total, the station was responsible for about 5 miles of coast, and it was along this coast that the Jason found herself. At 7:15 in the evening, the crew of the Jason had come to the realization that their ship was going to strike at any moment. The Jason was heading for the beach, and they no longer had any way to prevent it. Captain Macmillan was below, looking at charts, and came running to the deck shouting to the crew that they were lost. The crew donned life vests just as the ship struck the bar close to the Pamet River Station. At 7:30 in the evening, Surfman Honey of the Pamet River Station burst into the station to announce that the Northern Patrol had burned his signal. Shortly after he made the announcement, the man who had burned the signal also rushed into the station, announcing that there was a ship that had struck the bar about half a mile north of the station. The men of the life-saving service took the beach cart that had already been prepared and rushed to the scene. Before they departed, station keeper Captain Rich made a call to both the Cahoon's Hollow Station and the Highland Station to come with all the men they could manage. He added that they did not need to bring any equipment. He had plenty, and it was ready to go. The Highland Station responded in less than half an hour, and the Cahoon's Hollow Station responded half an hour after them. With the manpower of the combined crews, they approached the scene where the silhouette of a wrecked Jason could be just barely made out in the outer bar, through the darkness and the poor weather. The Jason was clearly going to pieces. The waves were crashing around her and over her, and as the waves came to shore, they carried with them the wreckage of the vessel. The seas were so full of wreckage that it made the life service men uncomfortable about putting their boats in the water. After the captains of the 3 stations held a short strategy session, it was decided that they would use the cannon to shoot a line out to the stricken vessel rather than risk the boats unless it was necessary. With the first shot, the line landed in the ship's rigging, and the life-saving service men made signals towards the ship, but they did not receive a response. In the meantime, some of the men who were patrolling the area looking for survivors found 19-year-old Samuel J. Evans, half-conscious, clinging to a bale of jute. Evans was hardly in any condition to tell them much. He was dressed only in underclothing, and this had ice on it. He was battered, but still had the energy to weakly ask if he was all right. When assured he was, he passed out. 2 of the life-saving crew carried him back to the station, where they worked on reviving him, making him comfortable, and then putting him to bed. It would not be until the next morning that they would get any more information out of him. It would not be until the next morning the life-saving crew would get a good look at the wreckage of the Jason either. The wreckage told the same story as Evans. When the ship had struck, the crew was all wearing life vests, having anticipated this disaster. They had rushed to lower the lifeboats, but before they could cut the lashings and get them swung out, the ship had broken in half. With this, the crew had abandoned the idea of launching lifeboats, and they had all climbed into the mizzen rigging. It did not take long for them to begin to be washed from the rigging, clinging to anything they could find to help them float. Evans could not say much of what had happened next, other than that he had been swept around and knocked about to the extent that he had felt more dead than alive. He had heard screams behind him from the other members of the crew, and they had been haunting. He had no idea why he was the only one to reach the shore. The rest of the crew had also been wearing life vests and grabbing for anything that floated. He did add, as a sad afterthought, that if they had sheltered in the foremast instead of the mizzen rigging, they probably would have almost all survived. The Dawn did not bring with it any other survivors. Evans alone had been fortunate enough to be carried to shore. The forward part of the wreck was 100 yards further along the beach than the stern, with the foremast still standing. The bowsprit, still intact, held in place with sails that were closer to ribbons. It spoke to Evans' sad observation that they had taken shelter in the wrong part of the vessel. The waves continued to dash over the ship, causing her to roll. The superintendent for the life-saving district arrived before dawn at the scene of the wreck, having been in telephone communication the whole time with the crews, and already knowing that he was arriving at the scene of a tragedy. When he arrived and surveyed the situation, he had nothing but praise for the work that had been done. The life-saving men were still at work, though the task had changed from rescue to recovery. In the end, they would find the remains of 20 of the crew. While the newspapers turned their attention to the fact that the cargo was entirely ruined by the seawater, but it was insured, 20 men were buried, and Evans began his trip back to his home in England. The Jason would be one of the worst tragedies to ever befall the Cape Cod Life-Saving Service, and it would leave its mark with a wreck that could still be seen at low tide. Her white figurehead still standing at her prow, attracting tourists who had only read about the horror that had occurred. The life-saving station had its own memento of the wreck, a letter written by Evan's father, thanking them for their care for his son. For more information, please see the Rutland Daily Herald from the 7th of December 1893, or see our other sources in the description below. Thank you for listening.
Thank you for visiting the Shipwreck Archives. See you soon.